Today, we're very excited to have with us Pat Alcock, who is the Director of ORA's Office of Training, Education, and Development, or OTED. OTED's primary role is to analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate adult education, training, development, and certification programs for FDA's ORA, or Office of Regulatory Affairs, employees, as well as with our state and local regulatory partners. Pat has been with FDA since receiving her BA from Lycum College in 1989 and has multi-district and multi-center experience at FDA. She served as an FDA investigator in 2 ORA districts for 7 years, a compliance officer in CEDAR's Office of Compliance for 3 years, and has been in management with FDA since 1999. She has received many FDA-level awards for her contribution to public health protection. Well, we're going to go ahead and welcome Pat to our conversation today, and we'll go ahead and get started. Today's conversation came from a series of questions that we had regularly heard from state manufactured food program managers and standards coordinators. So we chose those top questions. There will be a recording of this session made available in a few days, and you'll have that for those that were unable to attend. In addition, we will be sending out an evaluation after the call, and that evaluation will give you an opportunity to ask additional questions that we can include in future chats with Pat. Well, we want to begin by welcoming Pat to this call today, and let's go ahead and get started with with our first question of the day and some introductory remarks from Pat. Pat, you want to say hello first, and then we'll move to slide 1?
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, and everybody. I am actually out here in Chicago working from my hotel room, and we have a meeting downstairs. And they've been testing the fire alarm or something. So if you hear testing, it's not me. I'm not doing any testing. It's the hotel here. But welcome, and thank you for the invite.
Well, let's go ahead and, Randy, move on. We're going to question number 1. And the first question for Pat is, what are OTED's top priorities impacting food this fiscal? Oh, sorry, I take that back. I'm reading the wrong list. What is OTED's specific mission and responsibilities for FDA and state, local, tribal, and territorial regulatory partners? Pat?
Thank you, Steve. OTED actually has a unique responsibility not only to work collaboratively with you all with respect to our state, local, tribal, territory regulatory partners in the delivery of human and animal food training, but we also are responsible for providing training not only to you all, but to our own staff who conduct inspections and or support inspections. What do I mean by that? That means our medical products and tobacco staff. That means all of our compliance officers, our management, our administrative support personnel, all related in the medical products arena, such as medical devices, rat health, human and animal pharmaceutical products, biologics, blood bank, and bioresearch monitoring. So we have a very large portfolio of courses that we offer not only in the human and animal food arena, but also across the organization. And certainly appreciate that we are busy, but that is indeed, we have a large group that helps folks from the beginning of their career when they entry level into FDA until the more experienced level, and or if they choose to go into management, then we have some management tracks and those kinds of things throughout their careers. So that is just a quick overview of our specific mission and responsibilities. I can provide at the close of this or as a follow-up, our internet site has a brief overview of our actual work structure as we stood up 2 years ago as the Office of Training, Education, and Development. And there's a video there that kind of walks through the responsibilities as well. But that's the answer to question number 1.
Great. Well, let's move on to question number 2, Randy. So what are OTED's top priorities impacting food for this fiscal year? Pat, what are you working on?
Thank you, Steve. We are working on a variety of topics, some of which you may have heard of, and some of them are finally coming to fruition. So we're super excited about our priorities in the human and animal food arena. The first one, of course, is to continue to provide the FSMA and necessary human and animal food training that you all need for program standards, and of course, the all-important contract work. So that includes continuing to provide training in the area of preventive controls, CGMP inspections on both human and animal, and of course, in produce. From there, we've got some very specific projects that we've been working on that have come to fruition. and or are still in process of coming to fruition. You've heard me talk about, maybe Joanne Gibbons talk about launching training hubs. The actual technical term is telepresence. We hope to be launching by this new technology by the third quarter of fiscal year 20, or essentially, I'm going to get my math right, the end of March, April. Our telepresence technology is currently being installed at our FDA district office locations, and OTED is working to redesign one of our training courses, which is Food Code or FDA FD 211, to deliver the training via this technology. Unlike a webinar, the training is actually delivered over the internet, so you don't have the buffering and the delays and those kinds of things that you have when you do courses over the internet. Cameras and videos are included in specific rooms in the district offices, and I'm saying district for purposes of location, are located so that the video and the cameras will actually follow the speaker so that we can have that almost as if you're in the same room as individuals. We're actively working to update course content and test out this new technology. Obviously, when you do something along this line where, let's say, we could offer the course in Rockville, have a course group of folks in the Rockville Training Center, maybe our FDA folks, and then through this telepresence technology, pipe it out to approximately 12 other offices across the country, and then do some instructing, and then there would be facilitators at each of those locations who would then, when the instructoring from a general perspective is down and it's time to work on a case study or work on a hands-on experience, would then have to facilitate at those specific FDA district offices. So we know that the facilitation skills are different than when you're doing an instructor skill talking to faces. So there's some learning curve for our instructors and subject matter experts. So we're in the process of working to update course content. We're going to have to train our facilitators to think a little bit differently when you're talking to a camera versus talking to a live body. And so that's new and exciting for us this year. We just finished having the implementation of the equipment here in our Rockville facility, and we're hoping to have most of the facilities within district offices will be up and running by the end of December. But like any other new pilot, we've got to learn the technology and then change accordingly. So FD 211 will be our first course, and then we're working actively to figure out what other courses we can use through this technology. The third thing that we're working on is the promise that we had with AFDO and New York State Ag and Market. We've worked with the California Department of Public Health in being able to develop some sort of mechanism that can allow states to work with their local academia or regulatory associations to be able to put FDA courses on in their own regard. And so we're currently calling this the course handoff procedure. Through the efforts of New York State Department of Ag and Market and CDPH and AFDO and OTED, we've actually developed some procedures on what that would look like, and we piloted on a very small scale, small being 2 states, and we actually piloted FD 150 processing technology. We wanted to start out small because we wanted to learn kind of what we needed to learn, what works, how do we set this up so that other organizations can put on FD 152 or food processing, what's the impact on OTED, how do we deal with certificates, all sorts of other questions that came involved with that. But we're now at the point where at the end of September, we awarded a contract to a company that specializes in training development to be able to help us develop what I've talked to you all at the NIFRPS Alliance as being the infrastructure that I need, that when you go to use this approach, that we have the right procedures, processes, trained staff, understanding of process flow, so that when other folks want to do a course handoff, I've got the infrastructure inside in OTED to be able to do this, and it doesn't go into a big old black hole. And so that contract was awarded the end of September. We've had a kickoff meeting. We're working through what those expectations are, but it's a pretty lofty goal, and I'm expecting some pretty specific deliverables with respect to helping us to develop the course handoff procedure from the internal perspective. This also includes developing a train the trainer and instructor qualification process so that we can make sure that we have instructors who are qualified, we articulate what that is, we make it clear what the expectations are in the process to be able to authorize others to deliver our course on our behalf. The third part of that is actually what we've talked about with AFTO at some of the more senior meetings, and the fact that we will need some sort of audit program to verify that the work that's actually being done by either a state or an academic, in the case of 152, will indeed is following what the approved training is. So that's very exciting for us to be able to have one step closer to being able to offer other organizations to be able to provide that training. The fourth thing is, some of you know that NEHA and AFTO have been offering training courses on our behalf. Since approximately 2015, 2016, NEHA has been doing a lot of that, and AFTO has also been assisting in the last several years. Largely, this has been on the retail side, but we're looking to be able to increase that where possible. Once we get the course handoff procedure done, we'll have a little bit more of a standard way. So we've been piloting a couple of different approaches to have our courses offered by others, but we're really excited to be able to see this course handoff procedure formalize everything so that we have one way of doing business. So one of the other things that we're working on, just because I don't think we're busy enough, is that in order for us to continue to feed the ability to have others deliver our courses, do continuous improvement of our course materials, I'm going to be looking to AFTO and others to be able to help us, including my own staff, in improving our instructor and student manual courses. What do I mean by that? We need to be able to have specific notes for instructors so that instructors understand what's expected for the student so that they can verify that the student is indeed learning. We want specific examples that target back to learning objectives so that any instructor or most instructors familiar with the course can come in and help teach that material without getting just a PowerPoint slide and no comments. So those are essentially many of the things keeping us busy in the human and animal food. Those are pretty much the big ticket items that we're really excited about for fiscal year 20.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot on your plate for fiscal year 20, and some very exciting programs that we've been talking about for a few years are really coming to fruition. It sounds wonderful. Let's go ahead and move on to question number 3, Randy. So question number 3 is, how does OTED determine what courses will be held where? The classic question that I know you get asked everywhere you go.
Yes, that is true. It is a variety of things that we take into consideration. This year, we took a slightly different approach that we've reported to some of you in the past. We actually began to look at it, so I'm going to break this down based on manufactured food programs versus cooperative food programs. And that's largely due to the fact that the coordination that we've had both with the Office of State Cooperative Programs and our Office of Human and Animal Food and Office of Partnerships. So what we did in fiscal year 19, instead of sending out a training needs survey, we actually went and looked over the course activity over the last 5 years and tried to look at what exactly were the trends we had on course offerings based on the past schedules. We recognized that we also had to take into consideration all of that very important things like FSMA, and so we knew that FSMA was going to have the large part of what we've been doing for the last 5 years. We also worked with the Office of Partnerships to do the contract data provided by OP to determine the relative changes that we might see in demand of courses. Again, trying to get that future approach so that we knew what was coming down the pike rather than being constantly reactive, which is how the process has been for many, many years. And then we considered the states who are unable to travel outside of the state lines because we know that there are some of you that aren't able to do that. For cooperative food programs, we worked closely with the Office of State Cooperative Programs to determine the level of need based on what each of those program folks knew of their areas. For example, the retail team worked with a survey of sorts developed by OTED's Alan Gelfius to help him build the data he uses to move the course from a state-hosted model to a more regional-based schedule in the current year. The other thing that we did was we asked the regional food specialists to reach out to the state to ask about what their training needs were so that we could reevaluate that from more of a regional perspective instead of having it state by state by state. Milk and shellfish, being smaller groups, the training officers work closely with each set of specialists to determine what the required and identified courses might need. From there, it becomes a little bit of a trying to pull all the pieces together. We have specific procedures on what we have to look into. At the Manufacturing Alliance course earlier this year, I shared, the Manufacturer Alliance Conference, I shared a document of the general considerations that we consider an OTED as a federal facility. We're required, as a federal training organization and a federal government, we're required to really consider a lot of different avenues. When we do courses that are long or short, we have to take into account the location, the facility, if we're blocking room hotels, the safety of the hotels. Are they simply located to the staff that need the training course? Is it too easily available to airports? Can we get to and from the airport? The last thing you want to do is go to an airport and then have to travel an hour or two to get to a location. Is there adequate transportation for hotels? Do we have to worry about, do we put them in the middle of somewhere and then they can't get to food and after-hour kind of services if there are any? We want availability of restaurants. We need to have the right size of meeting space. We need to be handicapped accessible. One of the other requirements, as you can imagine, is that if we have them at facilities such as hotels, that the hotels are deemed to be FEMA approved for the emergency and evacuation kind of thing. Are they local to emergency health services? For our courses that are longer than 4 days, we have federal travel regs that require us to have access to laundry facilities nearby so that our employees can indeed do their laundry. And then we look at what are some of the other concerns that we might have from our state partners. We look at what equipment is needed. We really then also look at seasonal events and periods of high tourism, right? We're not going to be able to find a reasonable rate of travel within the federal per diem rate, and that is our main focus. If we're going to want to try to be anywhere in, let's say, New Orleans during Mardi Gras, not going to be reasonable. And then we also look at what are the other high tourism rates, because high tourism rates usually mean the per diem rates are much higher than what the normal rates would be. And then we look at other things, like if it's a training course that has an actual lab tour or a plant tour, how close are we to those facilities? We've had some instances, and I can go back 15, 16 years of my own experience where, we don't want to bus people and have them be on a bus for 2 or 3 hours because then you're losing a large part of your 8.5-hour workday. And then, of course, we look at where the participants are located. So this year we took on a slightly different approach based on the needs, but we really tried to take into consideration the various things that I've said here based on what we knew the needs were and the history of what we've had in the past.
Well, just a few factors go into deciding where courses are located, Pat. This is a complex process to figure it all out. Well, Randy, let's move on to question number 4. So one of the questions I think we frequently hear is how are prerequisites decided, and is there an input process throughout that? And I think we might have discussed that a little bit at the MFRPA meeting this year. But Pat, let's learn a little bit more about prerequisites.
Thank you, Steve. And certainly I do want to have a couple of things to point out. Historically, our prerequisite requirements have been determined based on the collaboration efforts between the FDA subject matter experts, whether they're SIFSAN or investigators, SIFSAN's policymakers. These are the folks that sit on, and my staff, who are training experts based on the job function of the training course. And this is really where the content advisory group within our DHRD and now OTED process has been. Efforts are made to incorporate the necessary training programs. We're trying to create a curriculum, build upon each other, remove duplication of training materials. I know I see Mr. Fears on the phone. He likes to use, and I agree with him, the plumbing as an example of where we didn't quite do this the right way. If we looked across our courses at one point, we had plumbing as an entry level, but yet everybody felt like they needed to do an introduction to plumbing before you could get to the more complex work. And we really wanted to look at this and say, look, why not have a primer on plumbing from which you build everything else? It's the same concept for many of our courses. If we're going to introduce you to GMPs, then we want to introduce you to GMPs and then tie that to whatever the next program is so that we're tying the pieces together and then build a curriculum just like you would if you were in a university. Clearly, with the advent of the Food Safety Modernization Act, it changed some of our prerequisites and part of our continuous improvement. There have been times over the last, 5-10 years where we began to realize, well, if we tease this piece out and move it over to the left and make it a prerequisite, then we can still build a curriculum and the time in the classroom, which nobody wants to spend more than a week in a classroom, can be focused on the particular subject. Example, low applicant food versus trying to do GMPs and low-acid canned food and those kinds of things together. Again, that's in general. But of course, with the advent of the Food Safety Modernization Act and the requirements that changed for 21 CFR 110 and 117, we had to make some changes to our programs that I think gets to the second part of the question. We have had some discussions with AFCO. You guys brought this up as one of your resolutions. I'm aware that the resolutions are still going through our clearance process, and clearly I heard some of this at the NIFRPS Alliance. I think where we fell short, and I will own this, is that the prerequisites when the regulations changed required us to do better notification than we did in communication and implementation of any changes to those prerequisites. And so what I'm committing to and have committed to is that we understand that if we do change prerequisites, we need to be better about communicating that and coming up with some approach from which we will implement that change that takes into consideration your needs as well as, and I don't want this either, not creating any bottlenecks in a given particular fiscal year. So I think part of what I'm committing to is that if we were to do this again, we would want to have a different implementation time period. We would reach out to AFCO and ASCO and NASDA and obviously a few others and say, what kind of implementation do you think this needs? Can we get some feedback to get an understanding of when we can implement it and improve that communication? We do have and have routinely sought out state representatives are on many of our training courses. As you are well aware, I can point at FSMA preventive controls as an example in produce. But we also recognize that we need to have communicated that more, need to communicate that better than we have. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that I know there's been concerns about prerequisites for numerous years, and I could probably trace this back to even before FSMA. And so several years ago, we started a lengthy map. I'm calling it a map. I want to call it a study, where I wanted us to go back and really be sure that we can tie every one of our prerequisites to the course that it is supposed to be a prerequisite for. I didn't want us to come in and say, well, you have to do X, Y, Z before you go to this course if X, Y, and Z wasn't being built upon in the course itself. And we are near finishing those decisions. We reevaluated what should be a prerequisite. We reevaluated what is pre-course information and what I'm going to call nice to have, or if you want more information, here's where you go, so that we weren't making decisions that weren't specifically tied to the order and the courses that they were. And we've made some of those changes. We're in the process of updating all of the supporting evidence and documentation, course announcements, course catalog, and those kinds of things. And I'm hoping by the end of fiscal year 20 to be able to say that that's complete and that I can indeed have that common thread that runs through the beginning parts of your basic entry-level training all the way out to the more complex.
Okay, well, that is a fascinating process, and I know it's a big task to try to map those prerequisites to what you need as content to come into that course. But that was very helpful. I think everyone has always asked that question. Well, let's move on, Randy, to question number 5. Or Amy, I'm not sure who's advancing slides. What process does OTED use to determine which courses may be taught by others, such as states and universities?
Thank you. Just one other comment about the previous. I mean, I think obviously part of where our lesson learned is also continue to have those communications. So I'm hoping, based on the feedback that we have with this and others, that we can continue to keep those lines of communication open, particularly about prerequisites. With respect to what courses may be taught by others, such as states and universities, currently we have, under our cooperative agreement, NEHA and AFCO are authorized to deliver training courses on our behalf, and I mentioned that earlier as one of our priorities. These programs are specifically selected based on the developed course material, including instructor and student manuals, as well as administrative manuals, or the how to set up a course kind of thing. Once we continue to develop the course handoff procedure and the infrastructure I need, it's my expectation that we'll be able to, with the additional instructor manuals and student manuals, be able to have a more formalized process by which folks can offer courses. I think the real issue here is really We've got APTO and NEHA doing it under a cooperative agreement, which is our first venture into having folks deliver our courses on our behalf. Then we did the pilot in 152 with New York and California over fiscal year 18-19. We are looking to extend that pilot to test out a different course, the one that will have a regulatory component. And I wanted to stop there and kind of explain. I know there's probably some questions about, well, why isn't manufactured food part of these courses? We're trying to do this and plan and deal with the hurdles that come up. We've had some internal discussions with our attorneys about who should be delivering regulatory nature course content, i.e. interpreting FDA policy. And so we've got a couple of approaches, but I'm really doing a slow and steady approach because I want to make sure that we don't jump so quickly that the lawyers won't let us continue. So with that, at this point, it's NEHA and APTO. We've got this smaller pilot with New York and California that we've been doing with APTO and NASDA. And I think that as we continue at the end of 20, I have some internal processes with course handoffs and train the trainer, that the future is definitely looking brighter to be able to have states be able to offer these trainings themselves, or if you have an excellent working relationship with your land-grant university and you want to work with the university to help you train your staff, then that approach is closer than it's ever been in being able to do that. I think that's all I had on that one.
Well, great. Well, let's move on to question 5, Pat, but I think lots of our state partners were very interested in learning more about how you determine what courses can be taught by others. And our next question is, and this is one you frequently get asked. I know this. I've heard it asked about probably 24 times so far. And the question is, why can't I access the FDA LMS Pathlore records for my employees?
You know the definition of an antique? So FDA's learning management system that you all have known as Pathlore is an old LMS. It is an old learning management system. And we've got a combination of issues with respect to it. I have a very small staff and an antiquated system and a LMS that has some functionality issues. So I agree that you can't do that, and it's for the various reasons itself. Establishing and resetting passwords, I've asked the FDA help desk to do that, but that's run into some of our own problems. Accessing accounts is managed by my limited staff, and then we've got some functionality issues in the learning management system. That's the bad news. The good news is that we're actively working through the various government approval, IT, and procurement processes to purchase a new learning management system that is, shall I say, for the 21st century. And when I say we're currently working on a justification. I'm looking to be able to do some market research to be able to say, look, I need one that allows state, local, tribal territory to access their information. It's got to be compliant with the federal rules regarding IT security. It also has to be able to have some flexibility. I want to be able to, offer trainings through there, not just look up your records. So I know it's been a sense of frustration. It's a sense of frustration for us because it is a system that, frankly, and I'm just letting you know where we are, the vendor is no longer supporting it. So any changes we would want to make it more updated aren't even being supported, which is why it's time for us to be able to start looking for a new learning management system. And of course, to that end, Pathlore is only one of the 2 systems that we use. And this is really where I'm going to be reaching out to you guys, both in APTO and with NASDA and APCO, because one of the other things that I have is on the other side of on the online module side, FDA has been working with UL, Compliance Wire, on all of those online modules that have been tied to either specific food programs or the training standards under the program standards. And what we have right there now is because we didn't use, the best way I can explain this is because we didn't use a unique identifier like your social security number, we have email accounts that have been used as a unique identifier to establish accounts and a various list of users and passcodes. So it is, to use an example, in UL Compliance Wire, I could be in there as Patricia.Alcock. That's my email address. I could be in there as Pat.Alcock. I I could be in there as Patty.Alcock. And while I'd like to think Alcock is an unusual name, I'm pretty sure there's more than one of us out there. We end up with a lot of data that needs to be rectified. And over the last year and a half since ORA went under program alignment, we have worked with UL Compliance Wire to fix all of the ORA and FDA data. And our last phase of this, which is the largest, is to be able to fix the state data. And I know that the data, because I don't have connections to your HR processes, that I know that there are folks who left one state and went to another, maybe retired, maybe passed away. And I have no way of knowing who's still a legitimate user or not. And then when you add that combined with, I couldn't remember my passcode, so I had you create me a new account, we've got multiple versions, right? And I won't even tell you how many John Smiths are in the program. So one of the things that we're working through, and I've got a brainstorming session with my staff, is I've got to be able to follow the FDA rules with respect to privacy and keeping of information that's expected to be private. But I'm going to be coming up with some ways and reaching out to you all as associations to say, look, the last address we have for, and I'm going to make it up, California Department of Public Health, that's the email address. Here's a list of all the people that we have associated with your email. We need to figure out how to triage that so I can get the most updated list of who is existing staff and essentially put all of the others into an inactive folder. That's the only way we can figure out right now on how to make that data more accurate and to be able to carry it over into the new learning management system. So more coming on the compliance wire side of this. There is a data dump once a week, I think, from Compliance Wire to Pathlore now, but I need to be able to clean up that data, and I'm going to be coming to you all for some assistance. I haven't figured out how, and I have to follow privacy rules, so I've got to be able to figure out how to do that without violating that or IT security issues. And I think the only way to do it would be for me to go through APCO, and others and say who are either the training people or the lead person in management who can help us really dissect the data. Not really the question asked, but equally important when it comes to Compliance Wire and Pathlore.
Well, it sounds like you have a challenge that most of us can relate to, Pat, having had many of us have been through legacy data systems and the data migration, the merger, the procurement of new systems, and that's a constant challenge keeping up with IT at the state level also. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we all recognize how large a challenge it is, and we're glad to hear that thinking about state access is something that's on your radar screen, and I should say program access in the future, and we'll look forward to hearing more about this process as it goes forward. Well, Randy, let's move on to the next question. Question number 7 is, how are courses incorporated into program standards? How are changes made when courses are updated or numbers changed, etc.? So, Pat, let's venture into program standards for a moment.
Thank you very much. This is an area that I personally am still learning about, but it is one that I recognized very early in my career in DHRD and in OTED that we needed to be lockstep with the Office of Partnership and, of course, now with the Office of State Cooperative Programs. And so it's important to note that the specific courses, I believe, are no longer listed in the standards, but there are appendices that suggest courses that would be examples of what might meet the standards as you all develop your own plan for training. But it's important for us to continue to have that liaison and coordination with you all in the association. So that includes NCIMS, ASCO, CFP, ASTO, and we work closely with, as I mentioned, OP and the Office of State Cooperative Programs to notify and work through issues of course number and content changes. So as a specific example, we have representatives on work groups for the standards that work with the FDA side of the house, OP and State Cooperative Programs, integrate our teams and the operating groups. Jim Fear, for example, is meeting with the SCP branch managers in the FDA as part of the process of communication and coordination. John Stoll is sitting on the executive leadership team, or the ELAT, with OSCP, OP, and FIFSAN to help coordinate activity that cross or impacts each collaborating group. And then we've had numerous conversations over the years when it came time to update the MIFRP standard and others about making sure that any updates to courses and were tied together. I think another part of this is really the is being able to have that increased communication. That's really the main part of this answer. I think I'll leave it there. And then we update Pathlore to show the final requirements for courses, and I've talked a bit about that already this morning, today.
Well, that is a process I think near and dear to all of our hearts as we build out our program standards, and the majority of states are now in conformance with MIFRPs. I know that is a huge process for all of our state partners. Well, let's go ahead and move on to, I believe, question number 8, I believe is the last question. This is a question that we often have people talk about. So what's the difference between a course in the box and the train the trainer model, Pat?
Good question. The course in the box is something that we've called CIB because we have an acronym for everything. It's a tool that DHRD and OTED began using many years ago to assist states with your training needs. And what I can tell you from my experience is that it was met with mixed reviews in that some states found them extremely helpful and was able to get the training done that they needed. And others expressed concern that the CIB didn't help anybody, there was no instructor in the box, and as such, problematic. And we know this too because we would send out CIBs and they would come back unopened, so we know that it may not have been as effective as it could have been. That's not to say that when we are using it, it isn't working, because we know it is on some of the on the state cooperative programs. We use this largely in the retail arena currently as a CIB approach. FDA ORA retail specialists are using this process to set up courses for training local agency staff with a minimal support from OTED, and the OTED training officer is not on site. We know that that local component is important to what we need to be able to do, and really being able to have the retail specialists working on behalf is really helping us in that area. I think that as we continue to move forward with the course handoff procedures that I've talked about and the Train the Trainer program, where we actually train people to teach the course, I can see the need for the CIB program sunsetting. I think we weren't really wanting to sunset the CIB program because I don't have something in its full replacement. And as I mentioned, for the last few years, we've done a couple of different things, testing the waters, testing the process. And now, thanks to the work that we've done with APTO and NASDA and CDPH and New York State Department of Ag and Market, we've been able to really come forward with a process that will help us find access to a Train the Trainer program. And so I think that you've seen some of this where we also have done, we've borrowed from IFPTI, the instructor skills course or the course-specific instructor skills course. I think that's really the direction that we're going when I look at what the course handoff procedure is. How do we know that people have the right skills as an adult educator? How do we know they can teach this particular course, which is really, in my mind, where the Train the Trainer model comes from. And I think that this is really the future of how we're going to be able to transcend and have additional states be able to either to their course, to their state personnel, or in collaboration maybe I'm from New Jersey, tri-state area, to be able to maximize your training resources with materials that FDA has developed and approved or sanctioned, but yet not necessarily being responsible to deliver. And again, there's still a couple of hurdles we have to walk through as this pilot continues, but I'm excited to be able to say that I think we really are moving more towards the Train the Trainer model, and I'm hoping by the end of the year we'll have the procedures in place to be able to launch a Train the Trainer program more effectively. I think that is, and then the other component of that is just the verification that we've authorized so-and-so to be the provider of SC 152. Now we need to make sure that they didn't take the course and take a 40-hour course and dropped it into 8 hours, because that you're using our continuing education units. It's our sanctioned course. We need to make sure that the follow-through is there specific to the course materials. I think that's it on the CIB and Train the Trainer. So we've not put one to bed or the other. I think there's some folks who have a preference for one or the other. Once I get the Train the Trainer and the instructor qualification procedure developed with the contractor that we've hired. I'm hoping to be able to then implement that across the board so that whatever we did in Course in the Box 10 years ago, what we may have done with preventive controls 3 years ago, all becomes a uniform approach once we have all of that together. At least that's the goal.
It sounds like you've done a lot in this area, and we're seeing some really positive advances in it. I think what we've learned today is there's been a lot of things in the works, and we're getting to implementation on many of them. We're getting closer to implementation on many of them. That seemed like a fair takeaway from today's session?
I think so. I mean, we really are excited about the progress that we've made. I know that there have been some who've been concerned that, you know, it should have been X amount of years ago. I wholeheartedly agree. Between contracts and government processes and procedures and change management, it's taken a little longer, but I really feel like we have it within our sights in the next year or two. And that's, you know, we're still going to be a little bit wanting to make sure we use the approach and test and implement and take the continuous cycle approach and what worked over here and bring it in, rather than, I don't want to take this program and then go, every course is available, because it's just, I want the system to work and I want it to be successful. I don't want to set up a system that ends up blowing up because we didn't think it through. So, but we are certainly far closer than we have ever been in the years that I've been talking to you all and meeting with you guys at the various conferences.
Yeah. Well, that's been very helpful, and I know that all of us at the state and local program level appreciate your willingness to sit down and visit with us about our concerns and challenges. Well, I think if I recall correctly, Pat, that was the last question that we were prepared for today. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do you have anything you'd like to close with? Any remarks you'd like to give as we conclude today's webinar?
No, I just want to thank you all for your participation and for submitting questions. I think that there's probably a few other questions that we can answer, but these were really the highlights of some of the progress we've made and the excitement that we have. But certainly would appreciate hearing feedback. What can we do better? How do we continue to have lines of communication open between APTO and the states and their representatives, and let me know what else we can do to help improve. We're all in this together when it comes to public health protection.
Absolutely. And I know on behalf of APTO, we definitely want to thank Pat for taking the time to visit with everyone today. We are planning this to be a series of conversations. I think we've come to believe that it can provide great value to our programs across the country. And we're also looking at maybe doing a further expansion at some point to also go and make this a little beyond manufactured foods. But this was our inaugural session, and we wanted to start relatively limited and work from that. Once again, we want to thank the APTO staff, Amy and Randy, for their technical assistance on this call. They've done a great job pulling this together. Pat and her team for all their work on pulling together the answers and helping us wade through a couple dozen questions and determine what we thought was the best ones for today. And again, you will be getting a survey in the next day or so asking for additional feedback. In that feedback, one of the things we're asking for is what would you like to know on future calls. So please feel free to respond back and give us some ideas of what topics you'd like to discuss in the future. We would appreciate that information, and also what we can do to improve the call. We will be making this recording available, and it'll come out in a few days. Received the initial invite along with those that participated. So please take forward it on to your folks on your team that should see this and would need that information. Once again, Pat, thank you so much for joining us today, and the staff at OTED. We know you all do great work for all of the state and local programs across the country, and we appreciate all the training that you provide to us each year. And I will say Pat and I work together, I don't want to say daily, but definitely it would be unusual for us to have a week where we don't talk, email, or discuss something. So we appreciate that great partnership that we have with Pat and her team, Jim and John and Tom and others out there that are all a part of her team. We appreciate the opportunity to work with them. Pat, anything you want to conclude with before we end the call today?
No, we appreciate it as well, and I look forward to future meetings. Thank you, everybody, and take care.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.